Hey, this is Richie coming at you from the School of Marketing HQ. Before you dive into the show, I just want to tell you about a brand new short 12-week program we've launched called the Giants Marketing Masterclass. The program gives you access to insights and expert comments from over 25 CEOs and CMOs from major companies like Unilever, L'Oreal, M&S, Pret, and WPP, just to name a few. We focus on 6 key areas of marketing: customer, brand, commercial, creative, channel, and data and analytics. So if you were looking to upskill yourself or your team for just 2.5 hours each week and get access to a network with our industry's giants through our live sessions, do check out the School of Marketing website for more deets. Alrighty, for now, enjoy the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Places We'll Go show. Another fabulous episode in store. Very privileged to have Paul Mead on the show. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Richie.
Great to have you on, and I'll give a bit of background to Paul's prolific career in the marketing and advertising world. Paul is no doubt a marketing expert and entrepreneur. He's been in the industry, the digital advertising world, for over 25 years. So really, man and boy, seeing the world of digital evolve right from the very beginning. He started his career in publishing and worked on his very first banner campaign in 1998. Yes, in the last millennium, Paul was doing digital advertising. Then took a big leap of faith and joined UK Net Guide just after the crash in 2000. So this is sort of a dotcom, post-dotcom. And he built that business to over 2 million users a month. And essentially was one of the first social networking sites in the UK. Then took a detour 2006 and founded a digital marketing agency called VCCP Media, which he led for 11 years. And there's just a catalogue of achievements in and around the digital advertising world. Currently, Paul now has a really interesting split between his chief strategic advisor at Jellyfish, which I know many people will have heard of, a really rocketing marketing performance company, over 2,500 staff, 38 offices, and really they help clients navigate through the world of the big platforms, Google, Netflix, Uber, Amazon. The other part of Paul's world is working for a company called Vitruvian Partners. And so he is an advisor to a company that helps rocketing growth companies through their growth phase. So a growth investor with over 12 billion of assets under management, helping companies like Farfetch and Skyscanner. So this is the world of private equity that we haven't really talked about on the show. So that's going to be a fascinating new insight. But so much more as well. Paul is a fellow of the IPA. He's a consultant to Google, a mentor at Techstars, and a member of the Microsoft Advertising Advisory Board. Also, you wouldn't have thought it, he's not a nature boy as such, but he loves his nature, passionate bird watcher, young ornithologist of the year in 1985. Who knew? It's the first ornithologist of the year we've had, young or old.
There we go.
So there we go. But also in terms of context, it's important to know he's East London boy, made good, West Ham supporter. That won't please everybody. There we go. And really, boy made good. So big believer in social mobility, went to a comprehensive school, doesn't have a degree. Nobody in his family's ever been to university. So not that it's a badge of honor, but it's just a thing that Paul is a big advocate from a social mobility point of view. Paul, fabulous to have you on the show. You're going to bring loads of color to everybody's lives when they listen to this. Brilliant to have you on.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that introduction. I think you get to a certain point in your career where you're sort of listening to some of this propaganda that you've put together, kind of being played back, and you're thinking, wow,
that's all right, isn't it? Yeah,
that sounds all right, actually. Yeah, when you play it back like that. I mean, obviously, I'd probably never thought that I would be listening to a little sort of summary like that being played back to me, but that's very kind of you, Mark. Thank you for such a glowing introduction.
You're very welcome.
Well, Paul, look, I think Mark probably missed out one of the most important things, which you're a wee bit hungover at the moment. So tell us about this. How was your night last night?
Thank you, Richie.
Had to bring it up. Come on.
Yeah, well, I don't think when people listen to this, there'll be any denying it. But yeah, about 6 hours ago, I was on a dance floor. It was at the Wackledoo, which is a fantastic organisation, sort of celebrating and supporting women in the advertising industry. And last night's their big annual ball. Actually, their 99th. It's their 100th anniversary next year. So if last night was anything to go by, if next year is bigger, that would definitely be one to go to. So yeah, it's a 7:30 a.m. start on a cold December morning in the middle of the Christmas season. So diary wise, is a bit of a challenge.
Hey man, we put you through your paces, hey, in more ways than
Absolutely.
one. So there you go.
I'm just hoping you busted sufficient moves on the dance floor that you get invited back for the 100th.
Well, fingers crossed, Mark. You know, I like to throw myself into these things, so we'll see when the scores come back.
Yeah, well, very good. Well, yeah, this will help you clear your head and set you up for the day and the weekend. So I suppose to jump in. So let's start with, you know, where are you? How are you? What's the tail end of 2022 looking like? Give us a bit of a scene set.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Well, I'm, as I say, talking to you guys from my home in Northeast London. As you said, I'm splitting my time between Jellyfish and Vitruvian Partners. It's the usual crazy run-in. So, you know, from a Jellyfish perspective, as you said, we're a big marketing performance company. We help big brands think about the whole world of platforms, from TikTok and Snap to Google and Meta, and think about how you do everything in that space. You know, build a brand, create compelling customer experiences, sell more things. You know, just achieve whatever you want to achieve. That kind of that is a driver of growth. So, coming off the back of Black Friday last week, it's you know, it's an intense time of the year. You know, there's budgets that need to be turned into something meaningful, and so we've got a media side of the business which is busy thinking about, you know, how we help those brands find audiences. We've got a production side of the business which is busy coming up with creative ideas about what we make. So yeah, from a Jellyfish perspective, and I think for all agencies, you know, this time of the year is really intense, even parties aside. And then yeah, on the Vitruvian Partners side, that's kind of very much about working with the CEOs and the CMOs of those scale-up companies. So they're sort of Series D plus. The sort of stage that they're at is usually thinking about, you know, kind of global expansion, moving into new markets, you know, identifying those kind of vectors of growth. And yeah, it's a busy time, but it's really interesting because half of the week is kind of with an agency hat on. So you think about it from the supplier side, and half of the week is on the client side. So you're sort of seeing all the different kind of propositions, and you're trying to help clients to kind of speed things up, make the right calls, bring the right partners in. So yeah, it's a fun time of the year.
Fantastic. Paul, you know, you've got a particularly cool vantage point in being able to see what's currently happening in the marketplace, both from an agency perspective, so impact on clients you work with, and of course some major ones, as well as the partners that you have within the portfolio at Vitruvian. So what's it like on the ground today? What's the feeling? What's the sentiment?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Richie, because there's a lot of big things happening in the sort of digital market right now, and more broadly. I mean, obviously we've got the kind of macro factors that everybody will be aware of in terms of the economic cycle, in terms of inflation, in terms of kind of post-pandemic, and the impact on the supply chain. You know, cost of capital is obviously in a very different place to what it was, you know, a year or two ago. But specifically from a digital perspective, there's been some fundamental changes. You know, Jellyfish as a business is one of those companies. We call ourselves a marketing performance company because we think about everything that impacts marketing performance in a platform world. But we started in the world of search. We started in what people sometimes call performance channels, you know, SEO, PPC, programmatic. These are all biddable channels. They rely on like strong data coming through, you know, at a user level, you make a calculation about what that user is worth to you, and you make an appropriate bid. And there's this whole sort of amazing kind of end-to-end chain built on data that helps you to kind of drive decisions about your marketing. And, you know, that's something that has fundamentally changed in the market because of a number of things. Some of the things that that Apple have introduced into the market with their ATT, app tracking transparency rules, where they no longer, where they give you get a little prompt. You might have seen it on the app stores about whether you want to allow your data to be shared with a with the app developer. And that's fundamentally changed the market. The market is shifting. It's not just Apple. Google are on a similar track to this more privacy first world, this privacy safe world. So instead of getting user level interaction and data, we now get data at a much higher level, almost like at a cohort of people. So instead of an individual with a device and all of that kind of history about what happened before, which is obviously an incredibly rich data set if you're looking to try and forecast what someone might do next or what they might buy next, that's now really changed. So you've got a whole industry at the moment which is sort of adapting to a new playing field, a new paradigm. And Meta as a business, which was one of those, I think, that was probably most impacted by some of those Apple changes. Although it wasn't just Meta, it rippled throughout the industry. If you think about what they built as an advertising platform, they have had a pixel on every website on the internet for 10 years. And they've had their SDK, which is a little bit of tracking code that you put on an app, on every single app for like 10 years. And the data that's ingested from that, all those little interactions with every app or website, everything that you've looked at or bought, how that's gone into creating an ad platform, that's a huge thing. And if a big chunk of that data that's coming in goes away, it takes a significant effort to try to readjust. So it's a really kind of people. So when you put all those macro factors aside, which we're all kind of aware of, there's these fundamental shifts that are happening in digital to this, privacy safe kind of world. And it means that we're losing that signal, that user level signal that most companies used to use to reach their audiences. And it's interesting because on the one hand, you think, oh, well, Apple made the change. It's affected other big tech companies. It's probably been a 10 billion hit to Meta's revenue. You think, oh, it's just big companies affecting big companies. But actually, this was the way that millions of e-commerce businesses found their global audience. One of the most exciting things about the internet, or one of the things that I, love about this industry, is the fact that you could be a creator, a tiny business in Johannesburg or wherever you are in the world, and pre-internet, your world was your local town, village, market, wherever you could take your goods to sell them. Through the internet and through platforms like Google and Meta, you had a global audience of billions of people who were connected to the internet, and you had ways that you could efficiently reach that audience. Now, you didn't know anything about marketing. You weren't a digital marketing expert, but the platforms made it easier to connect a creator, a maker, a seller with billions of people. They could discover their product. And that is a link which is now being challenged. We'll find ways around it. There'll be sort of solutions to this, but it's a structural change in the market. And so it's a really, people sort of talk about it, but because it gets into slightly geeky areas, they probably don't talk about it enough. And that's, so for everybody in digital and for everybody who's in e-commerce really, or selling things or trying to connect with an audience, it's a big shift.
The world is certainly changing. I won't be buying shares in Meta anytime soon, I have to tell you.
I would, Matt, personally.
Okay, so you think they've hit the bottom? Well, interesting. We'll see. But
I mean, obviously, let's put all the usual caveats in there that this is
yeah,
not investment advice and blah blah blah. But yeah,
very interesting. I read an article about the fact that ultimately it's the change in Apple that's really ripping the heart out of
it
Meta.
is.
But clearly, Paul, you're a digital guru. Let's go all the way back. What got you into the industry in the very first place?
Well, now we're really stretching back into the misty annals of time, Mark. But as you said, I mean, I started in publishing, and even I think getting into that, I'd finished my A-levels at school, got some pretty average results, got a B in physics, which I was pretty pleased with. I got a C in maths, I got a D in English. So, I mean, that was pretty bang average. And also, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And you know, the thing that sort of adults ask young people all the time is, "What do you want to do?" It's like I don't know. I mean, like, inspire me with something. I mean, like, I could probably do millions of things, but I actually have no idea what I want to do. Anyway, cut a long story short, I've done lots of different jobs. I've worked in a flour mill. I've worked, you know, on a building site. I've worked in so many different businesses. And I saw an ad in the Evening Standard one day that said, earn 100K OTE on target earnings. And underneath that, it said, no experience necessary. And I sort of got my pen out, thought, oh, that sounds exactly what I want to do. I've got no experience. I want to earn £100,000.
Silver bullet.
I thought, this is it. I mean, you know, you're just flicking through the Evening Standard on the tube coming home. And I thought, you know what, there's a company out there for me. It sounds brilliant. Anyway, so I called them up, and it turned out to be, as you would expect, not everything that the ad promised, but it was a media sales business in the West End. So they produced these magazines that went to this sort of international kind of audience in lots of different sectors. And basically, they trained a team to try to sell ads in those magazines over the phone to CEOs. You had to speak to the MD or the CEO of the company. So basically, it was like this trading floor. You had 2 weeks of intensive training. It was commission only. And it was like something out of a movie. So when somebody sold a sort of full-page colour, and by the way, these were magazines that nobody had ever heard of, like sort of, I don't know, Business Director International magazine, or I mean, no one had ever heard of any of these magazines. And you had to get through the gatekeeper on the telephone by being charming and polite, speak to this managing director or CEO and pitch this. It didn't sound like a magazine when you pitched it. It sounded like some international project where you were working with heads of states and Nobel Prize winning people. And the MD on the other end of the phone was like, wow, what even is this? And you'd get round to the fact that there was an opportunity for his company to be involved in this project through this magazine. Anyway, so I did this for...
this is the Wolf of Wall Street.
It was a bit, I mean, the characters in it, because you had to sort of project this sort of air of gravitas, and you're talking to a CEO, and I'm, bearing in mind, I'm like 19 years old. I'm trying to make out that I'm some business mogul on the other end of the telephone, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just following the script. But people who were really good at it were sort of actors in between jobs who would come out with all of it, embellish the script, and they'd be standing up and pacing around their desk. And when you sold an ad, your name came up with the amount on a big red LED screen that went around the office, and everyone whooped and cheered. Anyway, I thought this is what the media industry was about, because I mean, I had no clue. And anyway, I bumped into a recruitment agent after about a year of doing this. And I told him the company I was working for. He said to me, how long have you been there? I said, oh, about a year, 18 months, something like that. He's like, well, people normally last about 2 weeks there. I said, yeah, I didn't notice that, actually. Like, everyone I joined with was gone after about 7 days. He was like, you do know that there are people who make magazines that people actually read, like, and there are like sort of proper publishing companies that have got like a, you know, like readership and people like to advertise in them. I'm like, is there? Oh, okay, well, maybe get me a job in one of those. And that's so he did, and I joined a more established publisher, and that's kind of how I got into the media world.
You learn how to hustle.
I learned how to hustle there. I mean, what was really interesting about it is that you sort of learn a lot about the kind of psychology of sales in a job like that, which when you think about marketing, I mean, we're trying to sell things, you know, we're trying to sell an idea, we're trying to sell a product, and, you know, thinking about it always from the perspective of the customer and understanding what their motivators are, what's in their head, you know, that when people talk about building brands and communication and things like that, it's a little space in someone's brain we're looking to occupy for a brief moment, like associated with something else. And it's interesting because it is like it's all kind of psychology, and that I think was the most interesting part of it, which is how you could put a script together of just words that could make somebody, not make somebody, but encourage somebody to do something in on a platform that they'd never heard of 10 minutes before you sort of picked up the phone and called them. And it's interesting because you learn about the art of sort of questioning, and if you're asking the questions, you're leading the conversation, and having questions prepared, and how questions can, a bit like a marketing funnel, can take you down a funnel from a broad concept that you'd never heard of before down to a moment of action where you take a decision and go, actually, yeah, I don't want to miss out on that. I will do that now. And it's, you know, on impulse. So that although it was a terrible job and commission only, and I didn't earn any money really, I did learn a lot.
I tell you, it sounds like the ultimate performance marketing advert without the, you know, I think Les Burnett, Peter Field will probably have a field day on the you know, the 60-40 split of that one. But
completely, yeah,
hey,
that's very true, Richard.
it
I wouldn't
is.
want to unleash them on that scenario.
But you know, Paul, amongst the fascinating world that you came from in that experience, the one thing that you did say, and I find it fascinating. God, I wouldn't even like to name how many decades later that you're still able to name your exact GCSE grades, and it's implanted, right? It's implanted from that young age, and it stays with you to this day. And I wonder, you know, what impact that thought would have had on, you know, the non-academic-y, getting into the way you did, all the rest of it. And I think we underestimate, and I think society and certainly the education system does, the impact and influence that this sort of these badges, which are quite arbitrary in many ways, have on a person throughout their lives.
Yeah, completely. And it's, you only need them to get through to the next stage gate. So nobody cares about your GCSEs when you've got A levels. Nobody cares about your A levels when you've got a degree. Nobody, you know, and it's like you're using them to kind of get through to the to the next stage. And often, I think when you're doing them, coming back to that point about, you know, adults asking young people what they want to do for a living, we've got this kind of crazy sort of mismatch between all of the jobs that are out there. Even if you just take an industry like ours, and this is replicated across every single industry around the world, you know, people don't even know these jobs exist, let alone that they might be a good match. Their skill set and personality might be a good match for those jobs. And there's this real sort of like blocker between all of this talent, which is still in the education system. And let's be honest, the education system and an academic sort of process is not for everybody, but people have got different kinds of talents, and some people are just great in the workplace and you want to get them into the workplace as quickly as possible, but they don't know that a lot of these roles exist that would be a brilliant match for their skills. And I always think we've got, you know, there'll be some kind of technology kind of solve for this, I hope, which improves what the kind of experience I had with my careers advisor at school, where you just got told about jobs. You could be sort of lawyers or policemen or whatever it is, but just like a small group of potential sort of established careers. And yet in our industry, you can be a social producer, you can be a search analyst, you can be, there's all these different titles that nobody has a clue they even exist. And you may be the perfect social producer, you may be the perfect performance marketer, but we have to match the talent to the jobs. And yet when you think about that challenge in other worlds, like dating, there's a whole bunch of people out there. One of them's right for you. How do you find them? Well, you use an algorithm which matches personality traits and attributes to someone else. Now, surely there's a role for something like that where you have some kind of inputs and a whole bunch of jobs that you'd never even known about before are spun out, and those type of things could take you on a different path.
Yeah, well, I hope someone from Bumble or Tinder is listening in, or even Thursday.
There's an idea there, guys. Maybe we should catch up afterwards on that one.
But isn't it interesting, Richie? Your point is that it's a bit arbitrary what some of these qualifications mean, and it's what's inside us that really matters. And for you, Paul, in 2006, you made that break. You set up VCCP Media, took the risk. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow something out of literally nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd already been in that kind of startup environment, for 6 or 7 years. I moved from a publishing company where we just, the internet was just kind of, this sort of quite sort of clunky thing. There were these little sort of rectangles we called banner ads and buttons, and we were starting to think about how they could be used. And just after the dotcom crash, I made the jump from publishing to a dotcom with a few other guys, and we started with one site and built that up, and then we launched another site, and in the end we had a network of about 200 different sites. We were really good at search engine marketing, at creating some content, optimizing that content, and also buying traffic in and arbitraging that traffic. It was an ad funded kind of model. And so I did that for 6 or 7 years, ended up as CEO of that business. And that was the first time that we tried to exit a business, tried to sell a business. So we created something from nothing to about 2 million users a month. It was a good business. We had lots of advertisers, lots of the UK's biggest advertisers were buying traffic from us and advertising on our sites. And I bought a book, which I've still got on my bookshelf somewhere, called the .com Millionaire's Bible, of all the things that you should do and shouldn't do. I think we did a lot of the things that it says you shouldn't do. And but it was the first, we had a big company come over from the US. There were, negotiations on an exit, and I think that was a good example of an exit where we could have done it a lot better, but we learned a lot. So I think we probably could say that we messed that exit up, and but we got a lot of learnings from that about how how to do it, how not to do it, which I think is often the case, right? The things that don't go well, you don't make any money out of them, but you get a rich set of learnings. So and Mark, as you say, from there it was about kind of going again, and start again from scratch almost. And myself and my business partner David Midgley, who was CTO, two of us started an agency one day. We had 2 desks, 2 phones. I think we had a sort of clunky laptops then. We were like, okay, let's go. And that's what we did. And then over the next 10, 11 years, we built that business up, found one client. After that, found another client, went through all the different sort of growth stages that you go through as an agency, and And it was interesting because we were digital guys, so we were digital marketers. In the beginning, we were just search marketing, and we set up this agency within another business, really, within a big creative agency at VCCP. And it was a really interesting environment, because in the beginning we had no clue what everybody else did, and everybody else had no clue what we did. We were like two guys in the corner talking about Google, and everybody else was coming up with creative ideas and thinking about all of the mechanics of how you put together a creative campaign. I think it says a lot about sort of VCCP and their parent company at the time, that they knew this was going to be a thing, and so they wanted to sort of back a company that was in that space. But yeah, it was a really, really interesting journey, seeing it from just the two of us up to kind of where we got it. It's still up and running today, which I'm very proud of.
Yeah, what a fascinating journey in both those experiences there, Paul. And it's interesting. I mean, first of all, congratulations on the exit. As you say, some amazing key learnings taken from that. And interesting, if you look at the stats, clearly majority of organizations don't make it through it all, and then there's actually the messy middle, as it were, where they just bubble along and they're not able to achieve the exit, and it's only a very, very small proportion that ever do achieve any sort of exit. And I guess that brings me to a thought that if there will be agency owners currently out there, and in this current environment, it will be a tough gig, really. So if they are sitting in that sort of middle stage where it just feels quite bubbling, and that's kind of in many ways can be quite demotivating, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, first thing to say is that the UK in particular has this incredibly vibrant agency industry. There are startups, really good startups that are launching all of the time. You have this really amazing cycle of smart people who work at a big agency and one day suddenly decide, what, let's do this ourselves. I've got a different perspective on this. Find a partner, 1-2 people, start something off. And there are so many really great success stories of how that's happened. And as you say, you've got agencies that are going through all these different phases of growth, and it is bumpy. When you start off, that first bit, when you get to a team of 20 or 30 people, it's not relatively, it's still a massive achievement to get to that point, but you tend to find that as you're trying to scale that up to the sort of 50 to 100 people point, there are some big structural changes. The way that you used to do things all in a room together, and the way that your organizational philosophy that worked then won't work for the next phase. And so there are all these different challenges, and obviously when you haven't been through that phase, you haven't got the sort of know-how to know what you need to do. So I think advice wise, I think it's always good to try and bring in some kind of outside eyes who've maybe been through that type of growth phase before, or can give you some input on what needs to be done. And the thing about this industry is that doesn't mean you have to give them a seat on the board or give them a chunk of equity, because that's one thing I learned from doing this, is that sometimes there's no need to do that. You can just ask people in this industry, and the people in this industry will often give their time. They'll meet you for a coffee, they'll give you a point of view, and you can get an awful lot from that. So having some input from people who've been through that particular stage of growth and can give you a bit of a view, I think is really important. And then just keep going. I mean, I've been chatting to a couple of guys recently who started an agency within the last year. Starting agencies in a downturn when there's tougher economic conditions, bit of a cliche really, but it does make for a lean business. If you can create a business when times are tough, you'll set yourself up well for when that cycle changes round.
Can I just one add, if I may? And the advice around keep going is one that I often hear. When is a time to kind of go, actually maybe it's not worth keep going?
Yeah, it's a really good point, Richie, because I think sometimes it's hard to know that when you're an entrepreneur, because it's a belief system, right? You have to believe in your business to get out of bed in the morning, and you have to believe in it, even if some of the evidence tells you, this is just not, it's not working. And so that's a tough question to answer. You have to try and take an objective view, or get sometimes some fresh eyes on it, because sometimes you really want something to work and it just won't. I mean, I before starting the businesses that I ran, I was involved in other sort of ventures and ideas. Some didn't get past the sort of very early stages. Others carried on for a while, and eventually, when you look back, you almost always feel like you should have got out earlier than you actually did. And that's because the belief system gives you like a lot of momentum, but also it doesn't sometimes allow you to look objectively on whether you could reset this, pivot to a different area, just step back. It's very difficult to step back, I think, once you're committed to a particular business idea. And that's where I think a group of people around you, or some people coming in with a fresh perspective, can sometimes plant the seed that actually you're a talented person, but maybe you're just not applying. It's just you're the right person, but just the wrong idea.
Yeah. But very interesting to hear about belief systems. And let's just focus in that a little for a second. People talk about growth mindsets, fixed mindsets. You've talked about learning a lot. So it's pretty clear you've got a very strong growth mindset. I think that sort of stuff is wired in right from the beginning in some way, shape or form. What's the genesis of your growth mindset, Paul?
I don't know, Mark, really. I mean, I always, I sold sweets at school, stationery at school when I was, 12, 13 years old, started it off, buying actually from a local shop at a retail price and selling in school at very slightly higher than that retail price, which obviously is a pretty bad business idea. But as I started to sell more, I started to go to the local confectionery wholesaler, to the point where I was at one stage bringing in 2 cricket bags packed full of Wham bars and E-number full snap crackles, all of these kind of horrible sort of sticky sweets, and I used to sell those behind the school canteen. And sort of car washing rounds and like I say, lots of different things. And I guess that's something that I've always had. But I don't think you have to have something. The growth mindset is something that you can take the parts of it that are relevant for you, right? That fit with your personality. I think sometimes you hear about these type of sort of archetypes and you go, oh, have I got a growth mindset? Have I not? What does that really mean? I think it's just really being curious. It's asking questions. It's having the sort of, the energy to make some change, or to do something, or to try something. And so I think it's about taking the sort of elements of it that you can apply to your own personality. We all know how we work best, what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are. I don't think you do really know that until you get sort of later in your career. But yeah, I think that's for me, the growth mindset is about, when you ask questions, you tend to find opportunities. And often, in my early career, that doing the simple things are what got me to the next stage. Not being good at what I did, but just being visible. I mean, I would try and get in earlier than anybody else, and I'd leave later than anybody else. I mean, you don't need to have any skills to do that whatsoever. But people go, oh, yeah, Paul's working quite hard, isn't he? Who is that guy? Yeah. He's not doing anything, but he's in there early, and he's not leaving. And they're just simple things that can get you noticed. And again, coming back to questions, asking questions, being curious, being the person who would do it in your own way. You don't have to be doing it in a big room if that's not your personality. But even approaching other people within the business and asking about something, they're the types of things that I think are, more broadly, what a growth mindset is all about.
Thank you for that, Paul. Paul, we're coming out of time, so let me raise the last question. You got 3 boys.
Yeah.
I just want to know, what's the best advice they've ever given you?
Don't go onto the dance floor. That's a really good question. I mean, I think it's interesting because even in my career, you always think you learn from people above you in your career, like hierarchically, but I've always learned just as much from people around me as from people above me. And I think it's the same with having 3 boys, 2 teenagers, and one in their 20s. I mean, obviously, I learned a huge amount from them, particularly from a marketing perspective, watching their habits, how they discover things, how they rediscover things. TikTok is an amazing thing where young people rediscover things that have been around for a long time, rediscover music that's been out there for a long time, discover products. My 14-year-old told me about this amazing product called an air fryer. I was like, oh, wow. Jack, like, how did you discover that? I saw this great ad on TikTok. I'm like, wow, brilliant. I had heard of that, but like, that is, so I think there's just watching them and talking to them about, how they use it, where they're spending their time, and things like that. I think is, it's probably the best learning I've got from my boys.
Thank you, Paul.
Of course, there's always a clue. As soon as they say, "Hey, boomer," you need to pay attention.
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly. Or, oh, that's such a boomer gag. Oh, God, that's like such a boomer. Yeah. We get all of this around the dinner table on a Sunday, Mark.
Yeah. There you go. Well, what a lovely way to end. Very personal way to end. I'm going to do my best just to pull together some of the key things that I think I've heard to wrap the show. We heard about your dual career, fascinating in and of itself, that you kind of split your time between 2 quite separate but somewhat connected worlds. And then we went quite deep and quite technical. We heard about the impact of privacy and changes at Apple, the impact that's having upon the platform world. Fascinating insights that reveals your deep industry expertise. Then we heard about the Evening Standard advert in media sales. I'm just imagining Wolf of Wall Street all the way through there, but very much about the psychology of sales, which then we went on to hear later that you were doing that out of the back of cricket bags behind the canteen selling sweeties. I mean, so there's something wired into you in that regard. Just your purview of the digital landscape is super interesting, and how you exit businesses, how you scale businesses, but very much about what's the underlying belief system in that entrepreneurial world. And just some insights into your growth mindset, which really obviously started very, very early. But if I try and put a wrapper on all this, I think there's a couple of key things that come through. The first is, you've said it, do the simple things and get to the next stage. You talked about that in the context of education, but very much about what's next. Keep it simple. What do I need to get to next? Not fancy pants, 20-year plans, blue sky, completely, la, but very practical, be focused, get to the next stage. And then perhaps above all else, I just get a sense that you back yourself, not in an arrogant or assumptive or silly way, but you have built a level of confidence in your own ability to back yourself through the thick and the thin. And when it's thin, you learn and you bounce back and you get yourself to the next stage. So there's a real sort of sense of, how you can build your own personal momentum through life and careers that I take out from this conversation. And I think that'll be very helpful for everybody to hear this morning.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and I think that change piece, and just not being afraid of change. I used to put a quit date in as soon as I started a job on day one. 24 months later, quit. And sometimes I didn't quit after 24 months, but there was always a reminder to make a change. And doing that even is just put yourself into different scenarios, and you'll be all right.
There you go. Another pearl of wisdom. And do you know what? We didn't even get to talk about the young ornithologist of the year type.
Oh, that's probably a good thing, Mark, for my
maybe that's the next one. We'll have you back to talk about that later on. But thank you so much again, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Mark, Richie, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.